It's your boy King Tynex here, and before I start the video, I would like to say that I am going to say in the video that well, this is just a rough draft, so it's gonna be a bit sloppy. But what I have to really say here is to like the video. Just basically we're trying to reach like 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I'm hoping that you guys can like the videos, just comment your thoughts and opinions on what I could do better in future parts of the what ifs, and maybe like share it to your friends and family. Maybe also like only like 20% of you guys are subscribed, so can we like fix that as well? And can we fix that, please? I'm begging you, because I want to get that community tab so that I can be more interactive with you guys, get a gauge of what you guys want more often, all of that good jazz. And that's all I have to say for right now. King Ty next, play that intro, baby. Yo, what's going on, people? It is your boy King Tynex here, back with another video, and this is going to be an interesting video. Number one, this is going to be like a rough draft of a video, anyways. I'm just going to see like how well this rough draft will do, so that when I write the script for it, I will get a gauge of like how you guys feel about this what if. And number two, um, like I know like a couple of people have done this before, but I plan on going all the way with it, bro. Um, Look, so here's how things would go. Things would be interesting for Deku, in where he isn't the same as he is in canon. At least, not anymore. Basically, what happens here is that whenever he was bullied, yeah, he would be sad. He would always be sad. He would always doubt himself. But as the years would go on, he would start to develop a bit of a rage, a bit of anger towards Bakugo, because he knew that Bakugo used to be his friend. It hurt that Bakugo bullied him all of the time. It hurt that Bakugo was basically his tormentor. All of that hurt Izuku. Everything hurt. And eventually, he was sick of it. He was sick of how he was being treated for being born quakeless, something that he couldn't control. It's not like he wanted to be born quirkless. He wanted to have a quirk, but he was just dealt the wrong hand, and he had to suffer. He had to suffer because of it. As the years would go by, his rage towards the whole world would develop. By the time he was 14, it was basically like a pot. It was basically like a pot that was overcooking, and like it was boiling to the brim. Like rage was starting to leak out of Izuku. He was trying to hold it in most of the time, but by the end of middle school, people started to notice Izuku become a bit more violent. He used to be more of a pacifist, which interested them, especially with how Izuku would fight tooth and nail sometimes, although he would always end up losing in the end because, well, he was quirkless. What do you expect from a quirkless nobody like Izuku? Well, they wouldn't say he's a nobody. He's known for being the only quirkless kid in school. Well, not only, but one of the few quirkless kids in school. And he was one of the easiest to mess with. Like, he always wanted to be a hero. So they would always knock him down for that. That's what they found enjoyment in. And Azuku couldn't stand that. Bakugo loved it, honestly. He loved to torment Azuku. It was one of his favorite pastimes. He didn't know that what he was doing would be his downfall in the future. As more time would go on, we would reach the sludge villain incident. Azuku, how should I say it? Look, basically what happens here is most of that incident happens the same as in canon. The sludge villain does grab onto Azuku and tries to force their way into him. Ah, but um, but All Might does end up arriving just in the nick of time, being able to save Azuku. But when Azuku wakes up though, um, All Might does say, "Well, you can't be a hero." This is after Azuku tries to actually jump and ask All Might the question. He would grab onto All Might's leg. They would go all the way to the building. Next thing you know, Azuku would ask the question, "Can I, a quirkless kid, become a hero?" All Might, of course, he says no. This is where things differ completely from in canon. This is when Izuku loses it. This is when Izuku finds that enough is enough. He is sick of everybody saying that he can't be a hero. He is sick of being put down for his dreams and aspirations. Everything that all he ever wanted to be was a hero. And he couldn't be that because of the fact that he was quirkless. But why though? Why couldn't he become a hero despite his quirkless status? He didn't understand. Especially with heroes like Mandalay out there who had like these mental quirks, non-physical quirks. Why couldn't he become a hero himself if that was the case? She was practically quirkless herself. As a matter of fact, people like Ragdoll, they were bound to be quirkless as well. They had mental powers, not physical. Nothing to help in a physical battle. Maybe like to disorient an opponent by using their quirk to like their brain or something, but that's about it. So he didn't understand what was their reasoning. What could they do that he couldn't physically? As a matter of fact, he thought that he would be more of an advantage because he wouldn't have a quirk to rely on. Then he could also make time to actually learn a whole bunch of new techniques as well. And that's what Izuku was planning on doing, but All Might just rejected that idea as well. He trying to get it into Izuku's head that no matter what he tried, it wasn't possible for Izuku to become a hero. Izuku would grab his fists, he would grab his arms, he would grab his hands, curl them up into fists. He would grab them up into fists, curl them up, and then he would squeeze them. He would squeeze them so hard that blood would start to leak out of his hands. All Might would leave Izuku at the top of the building. All Might didn't know what would happen next. Izuku was sick of everything. He just wanted to end it all. But something else happened. When Izuku ended up making it down the hall, when he ended up making it out, he ended up finding Bakugo trapped in the sludge villain. The same villain that tried to capture his body. Bakugo was fighting against the sludge villain. He was trying to escape its grasp, but it was ineffective. As a matter of fact, everything just seemed to be a terrible situation for the boy. Azuku felt that it served him right for all the years of bullying, but at the same time, he also felt that Bakugo didn't deserve to die. No, he deserved far worse. Not this, though. In Azuku's opinion, Bakugo was a terrible person. He was so terrible. He didn't deserve to become a hero. And looking at this just showed how weak Bakugo truly was. He needed this moment of humbling. That was until he realized that there were a whole bunch of heroes around, and they weren't doing anything. And this just angered Izuku. And the way he saw it, like, these heroes didn't know anything about Bakugo, most likely. So what they were basically doing is just letting a kid die right here. They were basically letting a kid who like, from the looks of it, is a teenager, basically trying to escape this sludge villain, basically trying to escape somebody that has tried to take over their body, and these guys aren't doing anything. Wow, what kind of heroes are these guys? That's what Izuku was thinking in his mind. He hated these guys already. This just made him angrier. Anger. And then the boiling. His rage boiled over. The pot was overflowing now. It was like soup in a pot. The soup was flowing out of the pot now. It was overboiling now. His rage boiled over, and Izuku released it all. And that's when something came flying in. A red flash. Like a red glowing flash. All of a sudden, went through. Next thing you know, it blinded everybody, except Izuku. When Izuku opened his eyes, Izuku blinked, and next thing you know, he found that there was a red ring over his ring finger. Basically, if you don't know what a ring finger is, basically imagine the finger next to your pinky finger. That is your ring finger. But anyways, now that I explained that little piece, what ends up happening is that when Izuku looks at it, he's confused, but his rage is just starting to overflow. It's more than he can really muster at the time. He actually ends up going ballistic, and he just goes crazy with this power. Next thing you know, he shoots at the sludge villain. He ends up going towards the sludge villain and ends up ripping Bakugo out of its grasp. The sludge villain is confused as to who Izuku is, as to what Izuku is actually. He doesn't know what kind of strength this boy has all of a sudden. He doesn't know what kind of strength he has. He doesn't know who this guy is. He sees that he's in this strange uniform. He's guessing he's a hero or a villain or something. Is he like a vigilante? He's never heard of this guy, so he's guessing he's a vigilante or something. He definitely couldn't be a hero, especially with how flashy that suit is, unless he's like a new and upcoming hero. But he went with the more vigilante route. Izuku ended up spewing blood out of his mouth, though. That was what caused alarm in everybody, because, as we all know, Red Lanterns like to shoot blood out of their mouths. Well, I'm going to assume that this is what happens, though. The sludge villain isn't really affected too much, besides Besides his eyes being covered with blood now. He can't see. He's been blinded by this blood in his eyes, and it's a stinging feeling. My goodness. It's a stinging feeling in the sludge run's eyes. He hates it. He's screaming now. But Izuku isn't done with him there. As a matter of fact, what happens next is that Izuku makes a construct of needles. Yes, needles. And they all barge into the sludge villain's eyes. The sludge villain screams in pain. It's not enough to actually kill him, but it's enough to make his pain immense. It's enough. It's Let's face it. Needles in your eyes are going to hurt. He's basically blinded the sludge villain completely, and Izuku creates a bubble of red energy, of red. He basically creates like this red light construct. And people are confused. They're wondering what kind of quirk this kid has. Who is this kid, anyways? He just popped out of nowhere. All Might fears the worst. He looks at the green hair, and he's starting to jump to conclusions. He's thinking, is it possible that is it possible? Is it really possible that is the same kid from the building that talked about not having a quake, whether he could become a hero or not? And he's confused. If he had such a powerful quake, then why lie about it? Why say that he was quakeless? He didn't believe that Izuku was a late bloomer. It's so late, so very late in the game to be a late bloomer. All Might was just confused. He didn't know what was happening, and he ended up going into his buff form to try and stop Izuku. But here's the thing: there is no stopping Izuku. Izuku is now an unstoppable force. He is beyond human now. He has completely lost his humanity, at least for right now. When All Might tries to stop Izuku, he is met with a force of power that that he can only compare it to All for One. He's wondering if this is All for One's doing. This boy seems to have multiple quirks. He's able to fly. He's able to make light constructs, at least from what looks like a ring or something along those lines. He's also able to spew blood out of his mouth, but doesn't look like it's really affecting him too much. All Might is confused, and can you really blame the man? He's never seen anything along these lines. He's just trying to stop Izuku. Izuku is taking the villainous route here, obviously. But All Might is trying to possibly save this kid. Maybe. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He's going to try and stop Izuku to the best of his ability. But Izuku is just too strong for All Might here. Izuku ends up grabbing All Might by the throat and actually ends up how should I say it? He actually ends up pinning All Might down to the ground. Izuku has lost his humanity. He doesn't know what he's doing right now. He's just so full of rage right now. He's just acting on instinct right at this moment. He's not even really aware of his surroundings anymore. All Might tries to escape from Izuku's grasp, but Izuku is just too strong. Izuku makes a light construct of a sword and actually places it next to All Might's neck. And this is basically meant to give a warning. Mess with me and I will end you. You are a disgrace to heroes all over. This is what you have made me. I am sick of everybody's mistreatment. This is what Izuku is thinking in his mind. He doesn't know who he's saying that to though. He's thinking that he's so sick of everything. It just feels good to release all of this pent up rage. It feels so good to release all of this pent up rage in one sitting. Everything it deserves. This world deserves to be filled with anger from Izuku. This world deserves judgment. Izuku would be the judge and the executioner. He would be known as the next symbol, the symbol of rage, the symbol of wrath. He was going to make a name for himself in this world. He didn't know how. He didn't know how he would do it. He didn't even know what was going on at the current moment. Like, what he's seeing is hazy at this point. Like, he's barely aware of his surroundings. He's starting to get a grasp of what is happening, but not completely. It's as if he's drunk right now. He's barely aware of his surroundings anymore. What he sees is different from what is actually happening. He's basically in that drunk state of rage. And that's basically how I'm going to end it. By the way, Izuku does not end up killing All Might. He actually has the sword next to All Might, but he decides to let All Might go. He actually picks All Might up by the throat and actually flings him away, throws him like a rag doll. Everybody looks on in shock. They're like, there's no way. There is no way that this guy just took down the symbol of peace in one fell swoop. Impossible. He's a symbol of peace. He's the number one hero. It's All Might, for crying out loud. Nobody believes it, but they can't deny what they saw. It happened, and that's what terrifies people. It terrifies Bakugo the most, because he knows who is under that mask. It's Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless kid that he used to always bully. He's now afraid. This is the first time he's ever been afraid. He's afraid of what will happen to him. He's afraid of Izuku Midoriya now. He's afraid of what Izuku is capable of now that he has just shown that he could take down a symbol of peace like that. He's afraid of how Izuku can develop. He's also afraid of all the rest of the unknown. Because up until now, Izuku was quirkless. He's afraid now of what Izuku will maybe do to him. If he even thinks about him, that is.
Fight to this series. Here I will be able to make a proper beginning for this version of Izuku. Now, this Izuku was different from his canon counterpart. Izuku had an issue with showing emotions. Even from when he was a little kid, he would react differently than others. He wouldn't cry, he wouldn't yell, he wouldn't laugh or anything. People found it strange for Izuku to be like that, and the other students kept their distance from him. His mother was concerned for him, considering his strange behavior, and went to get checked out one day. This was also on his 4th birthday. Around this age, most kids would start to show signs of quirks. Izuku showed none. Even when the doctor informed them of Izuku's quirkless status, Izuku showed no reaction. The doctor tried checking out why Izuku behaved the way he did, but unfortunately, he couldn't find the root cause behind his apathetic nature. When the kids found out Izuku was quirkless, they tried to mock him, but no matter what they did, they weren't able to get a reaction out of the boy. What they didn't know though was the anger Izuku felt inside. A fire was lit in Izuku's heart that day. It was small at first though, but as the years would go by, it would continue to grow. One of Izuku's worst bullies was a boy by the name of Katsuki Bakugo. He was an explosive boy, both figuratively and literally. He had an explosion quick and a very rage-filled personality. He always tried to get a reaction out of Izuku, but the boy just couldn't. Izuku hated his life. He hated the people that surrounded him. He hated everything about this world. The fact that he was dealt a bad hand in life. He was quakeless, and that was it. There wasn't much of a difference between him and the others besides that, so he didn't understand why he had to constantly be ostracized by others. Even the teachers would participate in the harassment of the boy sometimes. What made it worse was the fact that he couldn't even properly express his pain or fight back. His mother was the only one that showed any true care for him, treat him like a human being, and not something that's simply inferior to everything else. He absolutely loved his mother, and it pained him every day that he couldn't properly express it. He had to learn to express his emotions in different ways over the years, but he felt it wasn't good enough. By the age of 14, it was time for the students to apply for high schools. Izuku always wanted to be a hero, and it was one of the few things he could show the slightest emotion to. He was laughed at by his peers for this. When everyone found out that he planned on attending UA, they criticized his dreams, speaking on how they were unrealistic, but Izuku refused to listen to them. He would tighten his fist and feel his rage grow. It had been growing for years, but he managed to keep it contained. Even when Bakugo told him to give up on his dreams and wish for a quirk in his next life, Izuku only picked up his bag and left the room. The fire inside his heart was like a raging tornado at this point. He was breathing heavily on his way home. He would get captured by the sludge villain like in canon, but this is where things would get interesting. There was so much anger boiling in his heart that he refused to accept getting walked all over by someone, especially a villain that was trying to take over his body. Izuku fought back. He clawed at the sludge villain with a pure desire to live. They tried telling him to give up, but Izuku refused. Something pierced through the tunnel walls, and for a second, the sludge villain thought it was All Might. It wasn't though. It was something much, much worse. A blinding red light appeared within the tunnel. Both Izuku and the sludge villain had to shut their eyes because of how bright it was. The red light began to grow dimmer as it slipped itself onto Izuku's finger. Izuku Midoriya of Earth, you have great rage within your heart. You belong to the Red Lantern Corps. With all of the pent-up rage Izuku was releasing in that moment against the sludge villain, having this ring added to him seemed to only further ignite the flames. In an act of unbridled rage, Izuku roared like an animal and began to spew out a red substance from his mouth, covering parts of the sludge villain's body. Their body began to boil as soon as the substances touched them. Izuku would forcefully remove the sludge villain from their body by creating a force field of the sorts. It was in the shape of a bubble, but just as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared. The sludge villain, now that he was forced off of Izuku, bared witness to the boy's new transformation. It wasn't a simple costume change either. Everything about the boy changed. He had piercing red eyes with a mouth guard resembling sharp, menacing teeth covering the lower half of his face. His hair was pitch black, with the ends being blood red, and it covered one of his eyes. His skin was darkened from the transformation as well. He was more tan than pale. In place of what he assumed was the boy's school attire, he wore a red and black spandex outfit. The lower half was primarily black with red outlines that followed the Tron-like pattern. The upper half was red with black outlines, except for the sleeves, which were black. He had red gloves, although they looked more like boxing bandage wraps, and they didn't cover his fingers. The last, but most odd feature of his outfit, though, was that he had a hood over his head with what appeared to be 2 rabbit ears. He put on the hood after everything else was in place. Izuku glared at the sludge villain before he opened his mouth. As soon as they saw Izuku's mouth open, they tried running away. Everything in his body was telling him to get away from this guy. He wasn't fast enough though. More plasma hit him, causing his body to evaporate fast. It wasn't like the first time either, where it was just a short rush of the plasma hitting him. This was a continuous amount hitting him, and it was growing in size. The sludge villain screamed in pain. The first time was bad. The second time was even worse. The sewer lid suddenly burst open, revealing the number 1 hero, All Might. As if things couldn't get any worse, but in the sludge villain's eyes, this was probably better, considering he wouldn't have to go through the experience of getting burned alive. Even Endeavor's flames didn't hurt as much as this guy's plasma, blood, or whatever this thing was. For All Might though, the first thing he saw was that the sewer lid being melted by something red. He was confused and looked around. The first thing he saw was a sludge villain, although much smaller now. He captured him in a soda bottle and looked around to see a man in red and black. He was confused by the attire. Was he some sort of vigilante or villain? He noticed what was on the top of his head and almost laughed at the connection. He figured the boy was a fan that was attacked by the villain earlier, but they were caught off guard by the boy having strong enough quirk to resist. He tried approaching the boy to greet him, but the closer he got, the more he noticed the way the boy was acting. There was something off about the boy. He tried touching the boy on the shoulder, but they swatted his arm away. This surprised All Might. The next thing All Might knew, the boy lashed out on him. He started speaking incoherently, and something resembling blood dribbled down the corners of his mouth. All Might grabbed both of their fists, but he didn't expect for a blast of energy to hit him, piercing through his shoulder. He kicked Izuku off of him with enough force to send him flying back. Izuku managed to land on his feet though and growl at All Might. He shot himself at All Might. The speed was too fast for even him to keep up with, and he was given a blow to his abdomen area. He grabbed it in pain and lurched over. He looked up to see Izuku have a crazed look in his eyes. There was a fire behind those eyes. It seemed as if he snapped, but from what though? Before All Might could stand up straight again, Izuku blasted a hole through the tunnel, and he began to fly through the hole. All Might tried to run and grab him, but that last blow really took a toll on him. He was too slow to catch Izuku, and he zoomed out of the tunnel. Izuku wasn't exactly sure where he was going. He couldn't control his direction either, no matter how much he tried. He ended up leaving the planet itself, and his sanity began to come back to him when it happened. He began to think the worst, until he realized he was still breathing fine, rather than, suffocating. He was honestly confused by the whole situation. He couldn't control his actions at all back at the tunnel either. He fought All Might, for crying out loud. If he was in control of his body, he would have never done any of that. But he couldn't focus on that right now. What he needed to focus on at the moment was the fact that he could feel his body being dragged at an even faster rate than before. A red portal opened up in front of Izuku that he was helpless to move out of the way of. He went through the portal and was plunged into a pool of blood. He swam up to the top and looked at his surroundings. He found he was within a dystopia. He found he was in a dystopian wasteland, with the sky being a deep red. There was some weird giant red construct that he felt drawn towards. He approached the construct and stepped through the hole within the construct. He looked around, trying to explore, only for a wave of energy to hit him. He couldn't take the sudden intake of energy and collapsed to the ground. His mind was being filled with knowledge of the history of the organization he had been inducted into, the Red Lantern Corps, and his mission was to rebuild the Corps from the ground up. For the next 10 months, Izuku began to harness this new power of his. He explored the weaknesses and strengths of the Red Lantern power. He needed to be strong if he ever wanted to rebuild this powerful Lantern Corps. He was able to manage his rage pretty well during this time of self-isolation and practice making light constructs. He was pretty decent in it. He could make weapons out of these constructs, and he was also able to fly. This was something he picked up on from day one. It was a useful ability, even in a world full of superpowered beings. Having the power to fly was always a cut above the rest. He had this weird ability to spew blood out of his mouth, but he wasn't even sure if this was even truly blood, because it was like acid to whatever it encountered. It quickly burned through whatever they touched besides himself. It would have been inconvenient if that wasn't the case. He could use that as a surprise attack against certain opponents in a close combat battle. This wasn't even the only use of this plasmoid blood either. He could actually use them as portals, although he didn't know what the limit was. He discovered this ability by accident, where he tripped over himself one day and ended up falling in a pool of his own acidic blood. It didn't stop there though. He fell through headfirst and it emitted this red light before engulfing him, and he stumbled out the other side to see he was in a familiar area. He looked around and realized he was in the same tunnel that he first gained those lantern powers. This was early on though. Just a week after becoming a Red Lantern, he practiced using this ability pretty often, considering how convenient it was, plus he needed food. The planet wasn't all that hospitable for life, unfortunately, but Izuku had plans for this base of operations. 10 months passed, and Izuku developed fairly well. He grew over those 10 months to be around 5'9", and his muscle growth was pretty decent as well. He was still on the slimmer side, but his muscle definition was very apparent. Izuku was competent in his abilities, enough to say that he was close to mastering the usage of some. He managed to produce 10 Red Lantern rings from the power battery and program them to find strong individuals with great range in their hearts. He also set them for Earth too, simply due to his own preferences. Sure, the Red Lanterns were created by an alien, but he didn't know how other alien races would react to becoming Red Lanterns and how they'd feel about him being their leader. It was a risk with Earth too, but he would at least stand a better chance against them. Izuku went through one of his blood portals and appeared back at the tunnel where the Sludgeville incident happened. He spewed some more blood so it would still stay in effect even after a certain amount of time passed. He wanted to take precautions when it came on to things like this. He didn't have much to do at the time, so he wanted to try and get in contact with his mother. Thankfully, she still had the same address. When he knocked at the door and he saw the confused look on his mother's face, he realized she didn't recognize him, especially with all of the different features. "Mom, it's Izuku," he said. There was one little thing about Izuku that didn't change, and that was his voice. He was grateful for that. Inko recognized her son's voice immediately and wrapped her arms around him. She began interrogating him with a series of questions about where he's been, why does he look so different, where did he get these clothes from, and a whole lot of other questions. Izuku tried answering as much as possible within the short frame of time she was giving him. So, you mean to tell me that this red ring came out of nowhere, inserted itself around one of your fingers, gave you several powers, and now you're going to be recruiting a team of individuals to carry on some sort of legacy you never heard about until just under a year ago? Inko asked. Izuku nodded. I'm going to be scheduling a meeting with your doctor, Izuku, Inko stated. Izuku knew it sounded absurd. Even when it happened to him, he had to slap himself in order to make sure he wasn't just dreaming or something. Sure enough, he wasn't, but his mother thought he was a lunatic, so he decided to show her that he wasn't crazy. He began floating upwards and created a red construct of a toy All Might. This caught Inko's attention, and she dropped her phone after seeing this. Izuku. He was telling the truth. Inko couldn't believe her eyes. Izuku wanted to test his powers some more while he was down on Earth and began messing around. He remembered signing up for Yui's hero course, and if he was correct, a week from now, the Yui entrance exams would be held. He wouldn't miss out on this opportunity whatsoever. He wanted to see how he stacked up against the others, especially Bakugo. He looked back at his mother and informed her of what he would be doing. There were a couple of issues with this though, the first being the fact he was considered missing for the last several months. Second, he was almost completely unrecognizable. Izuku knew what to do about those issues though. He formed a fist and pointed the ring towards himself. A beam of energy shot out from the ring and began to reconstruct Izuku's body to where he looked similar to how he was before becoming a Red Lantern. Inko was surprised to see how easily Izuku was able to do that. What couldn't this boy do? I don't understand though. Why didn't you use that from the very beginning when you were knocking at the door? Inko asked. Izuku was silent for a second before answering. I didn't really think much about that ability until you mentioned it. Inko face palmed but smiled and hugged her son. She was just happy he was home and safe. For the next week, she worked with the police department to confirm that her son was no longer missing. Not only that, but also that he apparently had this sort of light manipulation quirk. She went to the quirk doctors for this and wrote down that Izuku was a late bloomer. It was unusual, but there were weirder cases. There was something odd about her son though. Izuku always had an issue with showing his emotions, but now it was as if he was a completely different person. He bought a punching bag just a day after he arrived back home and started using it regularly. It was as if he was releasing pent-up frustrations. When it came to spending time with her, Izuku was much more tense. His leg would always bounce while sitting down. She didn't know what was wrong. Before they knew it, it was time for the UA entrance exams. Inko wished Izuku the best for the exams and he smiled at her. Thanks, Mom, was what he said before he left. Izuku flew over to UA. He didn't care if it was against the law, honestly. There were probably like 7 laws he broke daily. He and a lot of other people in Japan. It wasn't as if this was harming anyone anyways. He landed at UA's entrance gates while everyone else was walking in. They were surprised to see him just appear like that. It wasn't every day that someone would come crashing down on a school entrance. A boy with blue hair and glasses tried talking down to Izuku, explaining how it's not appropriate to be using their quirk in public. But Izuku ignored everything he had to say. He walked into the building and exhaled heavily. That kid was annoying. He unfortunately had to sit next to Bakugo. Just being in close proximity to him made his anger spike. He could feel Bakugo's anger as well. Anger at the fact Izuku was even here to begin with. He always wanted to be number one, but that wouldn't happen here. Not at all now that he had his own power. Power that made Bakugo's explosions look pathetic in comparison. He suppressed his anger for now, though. He began fiddling with his fingers in order to help, and he listened all throughout President Mike's speech until the blue-headed boy from earlier interrupted the hero, talking about the fact there were 4 bots printed on the paper and not just 3. Izuku groaned internally, but he supposed he couldn't be too mad at him. He brought up a good point. What was with the 4 robots printed on the paper? President Mike explained the purpose of the 4th robot being that they were more of an obstacle that competitors would prefer to run away from rather than fight. It wasn't necessarily that they had to run, but it was more a more viable option than actually fighting the Titan of a robot. Izuku smirked. He saw this as a sort of challenge that he was ready to accept. Everyone left to take the written and physical part of the exams. The written part was pretty easy overall. Not much to really say there. He got a B+ there. It was pretty boring, but Izuku was hyped for the physical exams. He could finally get to test out his abilities and see how he stacked up against everyone else. He stood in the position of a wild animal ready to pounce on their prey. As soon as President Mike gave the go for them to head into the arena, Izuku leaped into action, quickly destroying the very first robot he saw. A minute into the exam, and almost all of the robots were already destroyed. Everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Everyone just looked at the carnage Izuku displayed. They were almost too afraid to move any further. He gave off a large wave of killing intent, and many were wondering if he was really trying to become a hero. They watched him punch through a couple of robots with his bare hands, create swords to slice down others, and simply blast away at others with this red light that came from one of his fists. They could have even sworn the boy vomited a huge chunk of blood at one point, but it appeared to be so corrosive that the robots it hit melted on sight. Teachers were also watching Izuku's wild display of power. He was racking up points fast, even faster than the explosive blonde. A minute in and he already had around 30 points. 5 minutes passed, and he was far ahead of most of the records set by some of the greatest heroes who attended UA. He had around 180 points in total at that point, and the boy didn't show any signs of slowing down. They lost it when they saw the boy fly up high into the sky and start shooting down what appeared to be lasers of some sort at pretty much every other remaining robot within the vicinity. 500 points within 6 minutes of the exam. That was unheard of. Not even All Might was able to get that many points, and it didn't appear the boy was tired either. This was an unprecedented event. Nezu appeared on an intercom and addressed the fact that those within Block C, Izuku's area, would have to return back to the stadium until further notice, as the robots there were all destroyed. The teachers saw everything and knew that most of the students entry candidates were unable to scrap together any points, hence why they were going to bring in their spare robots. UA always came prepared, especially for cases like this. For this one, although they never thought that they would ever arrive when someone could just wipe out an arena of robots so huge as that one. Nezu was still curious about Izuku's strength and wanted to give him one last little test. He pressed a big red button meant to initiate the activation of the zero pointer. Meanwhile, Izuku flew down and landed on the ground. He was pretty pleased with himself, honestly. He was expecting more of a fight from these robots, but being able to get that much work done compensated for his disappointment in how easy they were to destroy. Izuku was one of the last people to reach back down to the entrance gate, and when he felt light vibrations heading his way, he turned around to see a hulking behemoth of a robot destroying the buildings. Izuku smiled at this and began running towards the robot. Those who were with him tried to pull him back, thinking he had some sort of death wish, but their efforts were fruitless in the end. Izuku flew high into the sky once again and shot a simple light beam at the robot. The most it did was simply reflect off of one of its eyes. Izuku's smirk turned into a wide, toothy grin. This was going to be fun. Izuku created a giant construct of All Might, which made every teacher's eyes bulge out. This display of power was amazing. It wasn't as if it was just some giant hologram of All Might either. There was weight behind it. Each of this boy's constructs had mass, and this one was no exception, as it was easily able to punch the zero pointer and knock its head clean off. The construct then punched through the robot's chest and kicked it down before ripping off their arms. They beat the robot with their own arms for 30 seconds straight before Izuku got bored of it and flew back to the entrance gate to walk through. He didn't need to stay, unlike the others, so he took his leave. He knew he was a shoo-in for UA. The teachers, they just stared in awe. They just couldn't believe that there was somebody so powerful among their roster of potential students. Even Nezu was impressed. And that was saying something. Yo, what's good, Titan Clan? It is your boy, King Titan X here, back with another video. And as you can see from the title and the thumbnail, we're going to be doing the next part of the Red Lantern. We're going to do the next part of what if Deku was a Red Lantern. Now, when we last left off, Deku had basically demolished the entrance exam. He was not holding anything back. It was basically, how should I say it? It was basically like a kid in a candy store for Deku. It was basically like he was playing with some action figures when it came onto the entrance exam. He was holding an All Might action figure, and the other thing he was holding was, well, a robot that was probably like 7 stories tall or something. But we're not even going to get into that. We just need to establish that he was basically able to demolish the entrance exam. Now, when it came on to entering UA, Deku had already felt that he had this in the bag. He felt that he was basically a shoe-in for UA, and sure enough he was. He would arrive at UA after he got his letter. Of course, after like those couple of days, couple of weeks. And when he first arrives at UA, he doesn't actually fly this time, no. He actually rides the bus there, albeit in his more human form. When he sees the door for Class 1A, he is actually surprised at the size. He would assume that, well, there would probably be like a bunch of giants or something at UA. And that's probably why they would have decided to make the door so, well, large. I mean, granted, there are people who were like 8 feet tall within like the world of My Hero Academia, such as, well, Fat Gum. So Deku was thinking along those sort of lines. He would hear the yelling of Bakugo and Ida as soon as he walked in through the door, and he was quickly annoyed by the interaction between these two. Ida would stop talking to Bakugo and actually turn around when he hears footsteps. He notices that the person who had just entered through the door was Izuku. He actually ended up rushing over to Izuku and bowed before him, saying that he was the much better candidate in his opinion. For UA at the very least. He said that he was much smarter than him when it came on to knowing the hidden meaning behind the exam. He admitted to being cowardly when it came on to facing the 0-pointer. He thought that it would just be a waste of time, but apparently Izuku was able to find that no, there were actually points hidden behind this robot. It was only to seek out who was the most bold, and clearly Izuku was much bolder than Ida ever was. Izuku would just look at him awkwardly before saying, "Sure." Izuku decided to keep the whole thing about just wanting to fight the robot thing a secret, because he admitted that he did like to praise a little bit. Then he would look over to Bakugo. Bakugo and Izuku would look at each other before glaring. They would glare at each other very, very intensely, honestly. Well, until Uraraka showed up. She actually tapped Izuku's shoulder, which disrupted the intensity of the situation. The air was very tense. The air was thick with intensity right now. When she did end up thanking him for saving her from the robot, she had a bright smile on her face. She had these rosy cheeks. He just wanted to pinch them or something along those lines. She was just so bright. And it kind of hurt him, honestly, because she just seemed too pure for him. But Aizawa would end up appearing behind both of them, saying that if they were here to make friends, they should actually leave. That's something that you would probably want to just do at McDonald's or something. This is Class 1A, a hero course class. It's here that you are meant to, simply put, train to become heroes. This is not a place to have fun. If you want to have fun, then you can leave. There's no point in you being in this class. He told everyone to get changed into some sort of gym clothes, and they would leave to do the apprehension exam. Since Izuku got first place in the entrance exam, he would be the first one to throw the ball. Izuku would create a construct of a rocket launcher and stuff the ball inside before launching it. He would get a score of 900 meters impressing the class, especially people like Momo, because this interested her, seeing as somebody had a quirk that seemed kind of similar to hers, in where they could create objects. Although she didn't know the full mechanics behind his quirk, or at least she assumed it was his quirk. But people like Bakugo, well, only Bakugo, he would be angered by this sort of revelation that it seemed that Izuku seemed to have a quake now. He would assume that Izuku actually was lying about not having a quake for all of these years and actually try to attack him, but it doesn't really go well. Aizawa would quickly put a stop to that by saying this: if anybody were to get last place, he would expel them. This would put fear in everybody's eyes. They're like, wait, what? Bakugo would actually take a step back and not even attempt to really even fight Deku now, because of what he just heard. He wasn't interested in losing his position. It was already bad enough that he didn't get first place on the entrance exam, and he lost to Deku of all people. But now he's hearing that you could get expelled if you got last place. He doubted that he would ever get last place though, but he had the feeling that if he tried to attack Izuku now, it wouldn't be so pretty for him either. For most of the tests, Izuku actually outdoes most of his classmates. 50-meter dash, he made it to the other side in just about a second, which irritated Bakugo because it took him 3 seconds more in order to get to the finish, and this also shocks Ida because of the fact that he thought he would have had the edge in this sort of competition, but no. Deku was apparently even faster than him, which is interesting. Side to side jumpies in the middle of the class. Grip strength, he created a large hand, crushing the device, giving him a maxed out score of like 999 kilograms. The long jump, he would just fly over the sandbox, well, just very casually. Most of the other exercises he and the others do fairly average in, besides the ball throw. The only one to really surpass Deku in the ball throw was Ochako, and that was because of the nature of earthquake being able to make things zero gravity, lose like that pull that gravity has on them. Bakugo is left steaming in range at the fact Deku beat him in everything and literally just says, you know what, forget it, forget what this teacher says, I'm going to fight him. So he would do exactly that. Izuku would actually feed off of Bakugo's rage though. Bakugo would try to make a move and fight Deku, but the boy quickly restrained him in one of his constructs. Imagine a straitjacket, but red. Overall though, Izuku was left kind of disappointed that he wasn't able to find any candidates for his Red Lantern Corps, and wondered what tomorrow would entail. The only interesting event for tomorrow, well, the next day was, well, when All Might appeared in the class informing the students about combat training. This interested everyone, especially Izuku and Bakugo, hearing the words combat training. When suiting up in their costumes, most of the guys were asking about Izuku's costume, since he didn't really bring a briefcase like everybody else, but Izuku would say that there is no need as he reveals his other form, red suit and all. Most of them are in awe seeing this, commenting on how he looks so different, and the suit looks almost as if it's a second layer of skin. Bakugo would just snarl, saying it isn't that great, but everyone would just ignore him. Izuku would get even more attention when he left the changing rooms. All Might would actually stare at Izuku because he would recognize this different form that he has taken up. But he decides to just let things go for right now. He decided that it would be better to not confront it right now. All Might would begin explaining the exercise in more detail and draw lots. Izuku and the Ochako were paired together as a team against Bakugo and Ida. Izuku would have Uraraka leave in order for him to fight Bakugo, while she would find the bomb. He figured that Bakugo would definitely try to attack him, especially after yesterday's events. Ochako would agree with this method and she would leave, searching for Ida and the bomb. Bakugo would find Izuku and they would begin their battle, but Bakugo, he quickly realized that he'd bitten off more than he could chew. He realized that, oh snap, wait a minute, no, this isn't how things are supposed to go! Izuku was just too strong for Bakugo right now, as each of his punches felt like bricks being thrown at him. Bakugo was left unconscious by Izuku as the boy would throw him to the other side of the room and have capture tape wrap around him. Well, wrap around his arm. Izuku would fly up through the windows and find Ida running around with the bomb. Izuku would just shake his head at this almost hilarious scene. It's as if they were playing cat and mouse right now. Izuku would just use his ring to create a bubble encasing the object, securing their victory. Well, Ida would see this and would just be in bewilderment. He's like, when did he get here? And he beats himself up about not remembering that Izuku could really fly, especially after the events of yesterday. Although he assumed that it was more so hovering than really flying yesterday. Now he sees that no, he can really fly all the way, not just hover off the ground or anything. Students are left intimidated by Izuku after his display of strength against Bakugo, but they also kind of cheer for Izuku, saying that he is very strong. All Might would reprimand Izuku for going too far at Bakugo though. Izuku doesn't care because after everything that Bakugo did to him, this was just lightweight. Sure, he made Bakugo bleed. Sure, he brought him to an unconscious state. He beat him up that badly. Sure, he has black eyes, some bruises from here and there. But that's lightweight. That's nothing compared to the torment he went through for like a decade of his life. Izuku would watch the rest of the students as they would display their talents, and a couple actually would catch his attention. The first was Shoto Todoroki, who actually froze a building, securing their victory from the get-go. Powerful quake, and his rage was that of a cold fire, you could say. The second was Tokoyami, who possessed a unique sentient quake, but it felt like he was restraining his negative emotions. Interesting. You would have to look into this one a bit more. He would save Todoroki for later, but this guy was like 2-in-1, so he was going to try and get these negative emotions out of him. Really try to push towards him releasing them. Really release the restraints so that he could fully take the Red Lantern ring. Now, all the rest of the fights will go pretty similar to in canon, and that's pretty much it for this part of the arc. The next thing that would probably happen is when it comes on to electing class rep. Of course, Aizawa would just say that they need to perform something incredibly important. Now, most of the class would start to tense up, believing that they would be going through another one of those apprehension exams where somebody would be threatened with expulsion, which, by the way, Manetta was actually expelled from UA since he ended up getting last place. So the students they take any of Aizawa's threats very, very seriously here. But Aizawa just quickly disarms the tension in the room, explaining that, well, they need to elect a class rep. Everybody would pretty much just cheer, thinking that this would be exciting, and everybody would just be raising their hands saying that they should be class rep for this and that reason. Aizawa would get sick of the noise and use his quirk to settle them all down. I mean, after all, his quirk, the way that he is able to activate his quirk is quite intimidating. But in the end, Ida ends up getting class rep. The reason for it not being Izuku here is because of the fact that some of the students, they were intimidated by Izuku, and well, they wanted nothing to do with him. They didn't want him to be a class rep in fear of him being just too strong of a person, and they think that he would go into more of a dictatorship role. So they decided that Ida would be a better choice, since he seems to also be on the more diligent side. Anyways, that's basically it. I would say that Momo is still also elected assistant class rep, or like vice president, whatever that name was. When it comes on to lunch though, Izuku would actually not sit by Ida and Uraraka here. No, instead what ends up happening is that, while yes, he does get his katsudan because that is his favorite meal, he ends up deciding to sit by Tokoyami, who in this one is just by like himself and Tsuyu. He's by himself and Tsuyu. Tsuyu is actually sitting by Tokoyami because she doesn't really care for his very brooding attitude, his edgy attitude, you could say. And well, it's basically the same for Izuku. He would actually begin to bond with Tokoyami. All three of them would actually begin to bond here. Tokoyami's edginess didn't really bother Izuku. It never deterred him from his path. He knew what he wanted, and he knew that he was going to get it. But then the alarm would go off, and many of the students would actually start to run in fear, thinking that there were villains on campus or something along those lines. They knew that something was wrong. Especially the third year students, they had never heard of the alarm going off up until then. So there was definitely something wrong. The students would scatter per usual when they heard about the security breach, and Izuku would actually fly to the ceiling in order to escape the crowd, while Ida was left to fend for himself and actually calm down the rest of the students, securing his position as class rep. After everything is taken care of, the next prominent thing would be the bus ride to USJ. While they were riding on the bus, Tsuyu would actually ask Izuku about his quirk. This would actually gather the attention of a couple of other students who were also curious about Izuku's quake. After all, he never really explained what it could do. Like, they've seen him be able to fly and make light constructs that aren't just holograms or anything. They had weight to them. They'd seen what he could do with those constructs. So they were curious as to just how his quirk worked. I say quirk in quotations. Anyways, Zuko would only see the basics, being that he can empower himself through certain emotions. He didn't mention what exact emotions, and when it came on to the empowerment part, he mentioned that yeah, he can do a multitude of things with these emotions. When he says empower himself, basically he explained that yeah, he can make these light constructs, although they take some focus. He can also fly, and there's some other things that he'd rather keep a surprise for later on. He didn't want to give out all his cards so soon. The students would get kind of disappointed knowing that Izuku was holding back information from them. But before they could pry any more information out of him, they would arrive at the USJ. 13 would begin explaining the purpose of the training until Kirishima pointed out that there was something off. They would actually turn around and see actual villains pop out of the sort of black and purple portal. Kirishima at first thought that these were some sort of actors, some sort of prop villains, you could say. He thought that this was just part of the training and that the USJ really had it all. But Aizawa would tell everybody to stand back since, no, these were actually real villains. This notion actually caused many of the students to have their blood run cold. There was no way, no, there was no way that these could be real villains, but sure enough, they would actually start to attack the students. There was even one villain just popping out of the portal who even declared that they were going to just destroy the USJ. Show that they were not ones to be, show that they were to be reckoned with. They were not to be taken lightly, and that UA would have to lose its reputation. They would have to suffer great casualties today. Zuko refused to have that happen though. He would actually not listen to Aizawa, and he would actually end up shooting down a couple of the villains. Aizawa would yell at Zuko for killing some of these guys, but he'd deal with the boy later. He figured that while yes, it was bad that Izuku killed some people, at the same time, it was out of an act of self-defense, so we couldn't be too hard on the kid. Kirigiri would manage to actually teleport most of the students away. This would include, Izuku and Bakugo and Kirishima. With Bakugo and Kirishima, they had actually refused to get behind 13 as well when they had tried escaping to a higher part of the USJ. So, when Kirigiri ended up teleporting over to where 13 was, they had tried to use the quirk black hole on Kirigiri in order to suck them up in that hole, but Bakugo and Kirishima, they would try to fight Kirigiri. They would end up jeopardizing the whole purpose of what they would end up jeopardizing all of 13's plan, which would cause Kirigiri to have a chance to teleport those two away as well. when it came on to where Izuku was teleported, he would actually be teleported to the flood zone. But his anger would actually start to boil the water. This was anger and frustration because of the fact that he knew he could probably do more if he was on the other side. Izuku would quickly fly out to the water and drop onto the boat before shooting down the present villains. Tsuyu would just be standing on the boat looking at Izuku in shock and fear at just how quickly he went about, well, killing these villains. Sure, he knew that they were villains and all, but that didn't take away from the fact that they were also people as well. So to have him be so readily easy to just end these guys, that kind of unnerved her. She was left in a state of, I've already described it, but she was left in a state of shock and fear from that, and just how Izuku would display his power. She was already kind of intimidated of Izuku from beforehand when she saw his battle trial against Bakugo, but this was on another level. Izuku would leave and go around the USJ. He would try to help others take down this set of villains as well, trying to lower down any sort of casualties. Many were shocked when they saw Izuku kill though. I mean, can you really blame them? With everything that was going on, just seeing one of their classmates show absolutely no mercy against these villains, not even giving them a chance, that really kind of set some of them off. Then a scream was heard on the other side of the USJ, which would cause Izuku to become a bit alarmed. He would look around trying to find the source of the scream, as the voice sounded all too familiar. He didn't want to believe it, but it happened. He really didn't want to believe it. He refused to believe it at first. He refused to believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. But when he did end up going over to the flood zone once again, he saw that Tsuyu was basically having her face being disintegrated by Shigaraki, or decayed, you could say. This brought anger to Izuku's face. This brought anger to his heart. This just fueled him with even more rage than usual. He was brought to a much higher degree as he would see Tsuyu basically in pain. She was crying out for help, so Izuku would rush at Shigaraki, trying to get him off of her, but the Nomu would actually take Shigaraki's place. Shigaraki would get some distance away from Izuku, not necessarily knowing all that Izuku could do. The Nomu would try to punch Izuku, but Izuku would just end up grabbing the attack with one of his light constructs and fling the Nomu away before going over to them. He would fly over to the Nomu and actually cover the Nomu in plasma. He would look over to Shigaraki and hiss at him, especially after he would actually hiss at Shigaraki, not just for bringing all of these other villains here to the USJ, but what he did to Tsuyu. Sure, he wasn't necessarily all that close with Tsuyu, but he could actually feel a sort of friendship beginning to blossom with her. So to see him just critically injure her, this is what really set Izuku off. But Shigaraki would just be laughing like a madman. He thought that Izuku ended up coughing up a bunch of blood just now, thinking that he maybe overused his quirk or that the Nomu was just that strong. But that laugh would quickly stop as he would hear the Nomu scream in pain as blood was beginning to burn at their body faster than they could regenerate. Shigaraki would look over to see what was wrong. They couldn't believe their eyes, especially when Izuku created a blade construct and sliced down on a Nomu. Izuku was able to defeat the Nomu just like that. When All Might arrived, he was also enraged seeing the villains within the vicinity, although most were already taken care of courtesy of Izuku. All Might would deal with the rest of the villains and managed to subdue Shigaraki too. Although several other heroes arrived, Kirigiri was still able to escape, albeit without Shigaraki this time around. Suyu was left in a coma from Shigaraki's attack. It would have been much more detrimental if Izuku hadn't stepped in when he did. If Shigaraki had just laid his hand on her face for a minute longer, she probably would have been dead. That's at least what the doctor would say, but Izuku and Tokuyami were still in range and they would kind of beat themselves up over this, thinking that if only they were there for her before, if only Izuku had just stayed put, if only, that's basically everything that would be going through their heads. If only I was there, if only I was there, if only he didn't touch her, if only. It's just a mix of emotions right now. Tokuyami wasn't necessarily upset at Izuku because he knew that Izuku had the right intentions. He was trying to save everybody at the USJ. He knew that Izuku was a good guy at heart, but that's when things would have to stop. I say stop because of the fact that Tokuyami would still be angry. He's not angry at Izuku, no. No, his rage was directed towards Shigaraki. Speaking of, this one was actually held in solitary confinement. Izuku and Tokuyami wanted to see him though. They wanted to actually fight this man, show him a piece of, well, give him his own medicine, show him a piece of their pain. But All Might would actually walk over to Izuku and grab his shoulder, saying that they needed to talk. All Might would bring Izuku over to his office and they would explain that he actually recognized Deku from the sludge villain incident, which caused Izuku's eyes to widen. He actually forgot about the sludge villain incident all those months ago. He'd been so busy trying to learn how to use his powers, getting into UA and all that it kind of just slipped his mind. So he would try to apologize to All Might about what happened back there, and All Might was just trying to figure out why he acted like that, because it was just very unusual. He fought like a wild animal back there, even trying to attack All Might himself. But when it came onto the battle trial at the very least, he was less wild and he could actually understand what he was saying. He could actually comprehend Izuku. It wasn't that he was just speaking gibberish or anything. He wasn't talking like a wild animal back there. So All Might wanted an explanation for why Deku behaved so oddly during their first interaction. Deku would just explain that it was his first time unlocking his quirk, and he was overwhelmed by an abundant amount of rage. range towards the sludge villain at the very least, but once he was able to take him down, he he couldn't really control much more of his anger, and this was a mix of just anger and a sheer will to live, so he wasn't thinking too straight back there. Anybody that was close to his proximity he saw as a threat at the time, so of course he would try to attack All Might as well, not necessarily realizing what he was doing in the act. This was Izuku's explanation. All Might would accept the explanation. All Might would accept this explanation and say that he should, well, at the very least, still try to get his emotions in check. Izuku would nod, mentioning how he does also want to, well, end Shigaraki for what he did to Tsuyu. Of course, All Might would tell him to get rid of those emotions too. Izuku would say that he'll try, but it'll be very, very difficult. The sports festival would come along and Shoto would tell Deku that he would actually defeat him only using his eyesight. Izuku would laugh and mock Todoroki for underestimating him, especially with what he's been shown capable of doing so far. This would actually anger Todoroki, but Kirishima were trying to defuse the situation, especially when Bakugo butts in. Class 1A would be called outside with the rest of the classes, Class 1B, C, D, etc. Deku would actually be the one to make the speech. He would be the one brought up to the podium, and he would say for everybody to give into their desires. Give into your desires to win. Give everything that you've got here, okay? Because if you don't, if you're trying to just and give her half of what you got, he would actually look over to Todoroki and glare a little bit. They'll drown. They'll drown in the competition. He would reflect on how a crowd tried to actually bash 1A, believing that they thought they were the stuff after fighting villains at the USJ. Izuku would tighten his fists as the crowd would have a mixed reaction, with some cheering and others yelling. Izuku would just keep on remembering all that the people were saying that, oh, Class 1A isn't all that. Class 1A is just filled with a bunch of narcissists. They think that they're the best of the best just because they fought some measly villains at the USJ. But they didn't necessarily even mention the fact that one of their classmates was critically injured back there, and many of them could have actually died. This was just all going through Izuku's head. That's what was fueling his anger right now, fueling his rage. So when it came on to the beginning of the obstacle course, he would actually fly up and zoom past everyone while destroying all the robots in his path, trying to relieve this anger of his, trying to just calm himself down while going through the surplus of rage. This would result in him getting first place. Cavalry battle, he has the same team, but he would actually just create a bubble of red energy protecting them for most of the battle, and he would create spikes for extra defense. Tokuyami, he would use Dark Shadow to stretch out from the bubble and grab other headbands. Bakugo and Todoroki, they would try to break the bubble, but to no avail. Deku would get first place once again. The people who do make it into the next round are all the same as in canon. The last part of the sports festival would end up being the tournament. And when it first began, it would originally start with Izuku versus Shinso. Here, Deku doesn't really give Shinso a chance to even really speak, not even give a chance for him to open up his mouth, not even for a second. Instead, as soon as they were allowed to fight, Deku would end up creating a red construct of energy formed into a fist, which he would use to actually knock out Shinso from the ring. This would obviously disappoint Shinso because of the fact that he wasn't really able to show much of his capabilities here. So, the next fight though would end up being Izuku versus Todoroki. When it came on to Todoroki, he would actually force the boy to use his fire side, as he would either end up destroying or melting his ice multiple times over, to the point where he would even be in a state of frostbite, you could say. While he was in this frostbite state, he would completely force Todoroki to use his left side. This time, it wasn't out to the fact that he was just remembering his past or anything, but more so out of pure frustration and anger. Unfortunately, Todoroki would still lose to Izuku when it came on to Izuku's fight against Bakugo. He would fight him too brutally to the point where he would actually, Izuku would honestly fight. Izuku would fight Bakugo extremely brutal. And when I say this, I'm talking about to the point where the boy would actually start to bleed. He would actually pierce through some of his limbs, and he would actually end up breaking Bakugo's legs in the process. The referee would actually end up stopping the match and disqualify Izuku at that point. Bakugo was incapable of movement, but Izuku was trying to go even further, trying to really bring home just how weak Bakugo was to Izuku. Of course, when Deku is disqualified, he doesn't really care. Even when he is suspended afterwards, he doesn't really care. Aizawa would actually have Izuku attend school though, just so that he could end up talking to the boy, try and figure out why he acted in such a manner. Izuku would go on to explain that he had a very, very strange relationship with Bakugo. He would explain the fact that Bakugo was basically his bully for the last 10 years of his life. He was just giving Bakugo some sort of payback. 10 years of torment, and this boy seemed to have just gotten away scot-free. He didn't see that as fair, so that's why he had gone so hard on Bakugo. If it weren't for those years of torment, he probably wouldn't have even given him much of a thought. He would have probably just treated him like any other person when it came on to the tournament. Aizawa would hear this, and he would understand where Izuku was coming from. He decided to take off some of his time being suspended. He would even write that to Nezu. Nezu would accept this. Of course, Izuku would be able to make it in time for hero internships and his hero name. Everybody would share their hero names, and Izuku has an interesting hero name here. he would actually go with the name Atrocitus. The reason for this being that it just came to him. It just practically called out for him to choose. He didn't know the origins behind it. Well, he kind of did, but he didn't really know the names of the original Red Lanterns. He just knew their history. And this Atrocitus, this name Atrocitus, it just came to him. It just felt right in his head. Of course, some students were thinking that sounded more like a villainous name, but Midnight would allow it. Izuku would look through all of the heroes that requested him. He would have had a lot more if it weren't for his fight against Bakugo, but he still had a pretty decent amount. A couple of heroes did catch his eye though. These two would end up being Endeavor and Hawks. He would really consider which one would be more interesting to go with. Eventually he just decided to go with Hawks. After all, he was a younger pro hero, and at the same time he was the youngest hero to have reached such a high position, so we figured that he would be a good person to intern under, try and get some work experience from after all. Plus, with him being closer to his age, they could probably see more eye to eye. What surprised him, but he didn't know why it surprised him, was that Tokoyami was also interning with Hawks. I'm probably not using that word correctly when I say interning, but that's basically the best I can use right now. I don't know how to really describe it. It's not necessarily I'm saying that they're going to like that full on internship. It's only a week. It's only like a week of training. During this week though, Tokoyami would be struggling. He would be struggling to really keep up with the rest though. He would be struggling to keep up with Hawks and Izuku. Izuku would notice that Tokoyami was lagging behind, and he would actually approach him about this. He would actually tell him to use his rage in a different sort of manner. Use his rage in order to push further. Remember what Shigaraki did to Tsuyu after all. Doesn't he want to make sure that nobody else has to suffer that fate? Tokoyami would remember this, remember that painful memory, that blood-curdling scream of hers, and the condition she was in now. Even now she was still in a coma, and Tokoyami would obviously grow angry. He would ball up his fists. He would ball his fists and start to really tighten them and say that yes, there is absolutely no way that I will allow this to happen again. There's no way that I'm going to just stand by and let you guys get ahead of me so far ahead like that. And this is what really ended up pushing Tokoyami throughout the whole internship. And sure, he still struggled, but not as much as he was originally. Even Hawks would acknowledge that Tokoyami was starting to make strides. Unfortunately, either would die here because of the fact that neither Izuku or Todoroki were there to help him against Stain. Stain would still be on the loose as well. When Tokoyami first found out about this, he was livid. He wanted to fight Stain as well. Now he wanted to give him he wanted to give him a piece of his mind. if you get my drift. Izuku wouldn't try to hold back Tokiyami, but instead he would actually give Tokiyami a red ring, a crimson ring. You want to kill Stain? Me too. Honestly, I really want to end this guy, especially after when this happened. But in your current condition, let's face it, you wouldn't be strong enough. Look, I know a way that you could become stronger, and at a much faster rate than you are right now. Here, take this ring and put it on. Put it on one of your fingers. It doesn't really matter. It will give you power beyond your wildest dreams, but you probably won't be able to continue attending UA after this. So really, it's your call. Tokiyami would look at Izuku and look at the ring before taking it, putting it in his hand, just staring at it again before he would sigh. Look, if it means I can wrap my hands around this guy's throat and see him suffer, I don't care about the consequences. Look, I'll take it, and this better not be a joke either. A flash of red light would appear, and dark shadow would actually start to envelop Tokiyami in an armor-like state. Imagine Tokiyami's Black Abyss super move, but when it came onto his suit, it wasn't his hero suit here, no. Instead, it was a primarily black skin-tight suit with red outlining and the Red Lantern symbol. Although there was a red cloak as well. UA, I forgot to mention this, but UA actually became a dormitory after Ida's death as a way to protect their students. Unfortunately, I need to stop saying unfortunately, let's use a different word here. Let's go with this. Tokiyami and Izuku, they would actually end up leaving UA. They would actually end up sneaking out of the building and just fly away right afterwards. That's what ended up happening. Somebody was watching them though. Somebody was watching them, and this person was, well... Yo, what is going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video, and you guys already know the deal. If you like the video, remember to just like it. If you want, you guys should also share the video. On top of that, maybe hit the subscribe button, and just for the sake of it, comment below what your thoughts on the video were. And let's get on with the what if. So basically, in the last part, I had mentioned that Izuku and Tokiyami basically set out for revenge for Ida. After all, Ida was taken down by the hero killer, and this time around, well, he did not live to tell the tale. So of course these two would have wanted revenge, but somebody was actually watching this, and this actually take place, the transaction between Izuku and Tokoyami. This person, you may be wondering, well, was simply put Todoroki. Todoroki was watching the whole scene. He had watched everything from the very beginning. He was interested in these two. Interested because of the fact that Izuku was powerful, and he wanted to know this boy's secrets.
From what it seemed that his quirk was connected to this ring that he had on his finger. When he saw what happened with Izuku and Tokoyami, though, that's when some red signs started to show, some red flags, you could say. Basically, he had seen Tokoyami seemingly transform, and his quake seemingly became stronger than it was before. He didn't know for certain, but whatever happened there was something up. He was able to hear some parts of the conversation. Some parts were a bit muffled out because of the wind and other factors that were uncontrollable. But he was able to hear a good amount of the conversation to get the gist of it. Basically, Izuku and Tokoyami were going to get revenge for Ida. What was going through Todoroki's mind at the time was very dumbly, honestly, was that he should follow them. Of course, he would actually try and follow them, but he wasn't necessarily able to keep up with the two, considering they were able to fly now. Well, more specifically, Tokoyami. Tokoyami was able to fly for no good reason. It was certainly not out of the possibility for him to be able to fly, considering what his quirk is capable of. But to fly so gracefully, no, he would have never imagined that. Honestly, impossible for him to believe to have happened. If you were to ever tell him that, oh, apparently now you can actually fly without using your quirk. Of course, Todoroki would not believe any of that. So now he would just be running across the streets trying to look up at the sky, but eventually just lose track of them. He would try and see if there was a GPS that was on Izuku's signal or something along those lines, but nothing. He would just have to start looking around. Eventually, he would find Izuku and Tokoyami once again. Not necessarily in Hosu, but in the city right after it. In the city right next to Hosu. Basically, what ended up happening is that Izuku and Tokoyami were able to find the hero killer in one of his acts once again. This time around, what ended up happening is that Izuku and Tokoyami would literally stomp the hero killer right in his tracks. The hero killer would have tried to fight back, but Izuku was already too strong for the hero killer. With the addition of Tokoyami in the mix, it was basically overkill at this point, because Tokoyami's quirk, Dark Shadow, also relied on emotions. It was more docile when the emotions were controlled, but when they were having such strong emotions flowing through them, like rage, anger, sadness, all those sort of emotions, and it's dark. Yeah, no, there's no way to really stop that behemoth. That thing would go completely berserk, and the hero killer had to learn the hard way. The hero killer would have tried to fight, but it was inevitable. It would be inevitable that he would lose here. He was outgunned, he was overpowered, he was just too weak for these two with the Red Lantern rings. If it weren't for these Red Lantern rings, these power buffs they were having at the moment, this would have never happened. Todoroki would have witnessed it all and just be in pure shock. He would have never expected that these guys, although they seemed to be strong in the very beginning,
Now this was just ridiculous. It seemed like everybody was going to get stronger than him if he didn't try and tag along. He realized that these rings were apparently some sort of power boosters, and he wanted in on them. He didn't really know the whole mechanics around these rings though. So he would have ended up trying to confront Izuku and Tokoyami right after they had defeated the hero killer. Izuku would have asked why Todoroki was there. Todoroki would have just told him the same thing. He would have asked him why he was here as well. Why exactly was he here in this city at this time of night when they should be in bed, when they should be in the dorms? Izuku would just sigh and say that he doesn't have the time for this right now, and would focus his attention back on the hero killer. Todoroki would say that he would be willing to report them if he did not explain what was going on. Izuku said that they were already planning on leaving UA at this point, because honestly, UA is kind of weak right now. UA let one of their students die. UA was irresponsible when it came on to their students' lives. UA could be much better. The whole hero system in general could be much better than it already is. And people are glorifying heroes. Heroes are meant to protect, to save, but now everybody is glorifying heroes for popularity's sake. These guys are basically seen as celebrities now, and they're making commercial deals, they're doing all sorts of things. Now he could understand if it's for their living. He could understand if they are doing the hero work in order to make a means for themselves, to make a living. He can understand that. He can't completely fault the people for that. But to have it to where they prioritize being famous over saving a civilian's life, no. That is simply unacceptable. Izuku was going to make sure to tear this system down and rebuild it from the ground up. This was Izuku's plan right now. And absolutely no one was going to stop him. Todoroki would just sit in silence. Well, stand in silence, thinking about the sort of stuff that he went through, his childhood, everything that he had to go through when he was a young kid. He remembered how his father would treat him and his family, and then be glorified by so many people in the media afterwards, make it seem as if Endeavor is some sort of saint when he's honestly one of the worst parents you could ever have. Top 10 worst dads in anime. Probably being willing to almost be a runner-up for worst dad of the year, you could say. But Todoroki would simply know where Izuku is coming from and actually ask if he could join his journey. Izuku would look at Todoroki in confusion. Todoroki would explain how he already hates his father. He hates his father with a burning passion. The reason why he never uses his flames is because of how his father treated him and his family when he was younger. When they were younger, he could never forgive the man for what he did to him. And on top of that, now that he's hearing about how there is a chance he could rebuild the hero system and expose the frauds like Endeavor, he would be all up for it, honestly.
As a matter of fact, he would be willing to put his life on the line for this cause. Izuku would think about it, and he would actually sense quite a bit of rage within Todoroki's heart. This wasn't necessarily boiling rage though. This was a cold-hearted one. This was the one that's been simmering for years and years at a time. For so long to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. If you were to open a pot though, that's when everything would be released. Izuku decided that he would actually allow this to happen. He would actually call for a red ring. And he would actually call for a red ring. He was going to be the second in Izuku's army. He was only going to make an army of 10 people for right now. 10 would be good enough to take down this whole world of heroes and really build it up anew. He already knew that when it came on to just having one of these guys, they were already stronger than what many people would see as strong heroes. These guys would be mopping the floor with some of these pro heroes, being able to do much more than the regular heroes would be able to do. So Izuku was basically planning on creating his own task force at this point. Izuku would call for the red ring and recite the oath. Well, the oath would be recited for Todoroki.
With blood and rage of crimson red, ripped from corpse so freshly dead, together with our hellish hate, will burn you all. That is your fate.
Izuku realized that this process was going to take a while. He had originally sent these out thinking that they were going to immediately pick their hosts, but it had been quite a while now. They were going to need to speed up this process. So this was why he was also leaving UA, in order to really boost this process, make things go much faster than they originally were going to go. Izuku, Tokoyami, and Todoroki would all be on their way. When it came on to Todoroki's outfit, it would be similar to his in-canon outfit. His Season 3 outfit, I believe. Except for the fact that, well, there isn't a bunch of ice covering it. Not ice, but basically his blue suit, the one that we usually see Todoroki in. The main difference here is that it's red instead of blue, red and black actually. And when it came on to how his powers were amped, burning ice. Basically imagine how it is when it comes onto that smoking ice or sandy ice. I forgot the name of this thing, but you all should know what I'm talking about. Basically what you would use to make fog, to make those fog effects. And that's basically how Todoroki's ice has become. He can actually switch between freezing cold or to the point where it just hurts. It's not even cold anymore. It's not even below zero. It's not cold, but it brings such a discomfort. It hurts you. It hurts you at your subatomic level still. So this was what Todoroki had. Although his fire was amped as well, he would never ever use it. He made a vow not to use his fire, and he was going to hold up to that vow until he died. He would basically have Todoroki and Tokoyami go out and find more inheritors for the Red Lantern Corps, for the Red Lantern organization, you could say. Basically, these were his two executives, his right-hand men, and they would basically be scattering around trying to find more recruits. What Izuku would be doing was, of course, also making a name for himself in this hero society and the underworld as well, making sure that his name was known and that he was somebody to not be messed with. He was a threat to both sides of the coin. Nobody wanted to mess with this middle ridge. Nobody wanted to mess with this guy, because after months, of course, these guys would start to really form a bit of a body count. Yes, Izuku did end up killing quite a bit of villains and taking down a couple of heroes as well. He wasn't necessarily killing heroes like the hero killer Stain or anything, but when it came on to the villains, he had no remorse at all for them. He found them to be the worst of the worst, considering what all of these guys are. And sure, he ended up getting some villain recruits along the line, but they promised to never really commit to making the same atrocities they did in the past. Izuku was hesitant at first, but he decided to allow them. These villains that were within the group would of course be Dobby, whose flames were now white. They weren't necessarily blue anymore, they were white, and when it came onto his skin condition, the weakness of his quake, their suit would have negated this. Basically, it would have been to the point where the suit would have allowed him to actually be able to produce the fire without the need for injury every single time. He would constantly regenerate. Not regenerate, but more so that he just has more of a defense. He has more immunity to his own quake. Basically how it is for Endeavor, so he would just suffer from that heat stuff, you could say. Although when it came on to him, he wouldn't have to worry about the heat as much, especially with the fact that he is able to use more of his Red Lantern abilities in order to make up for whenever he is not able to use this quake because of the heat strokes he was having. There would also be another recruit in the form of Toga, actually. Toga would have been an interesting recruit. The way that she acted was very peculiar. But Izuku could sense that there was some rage in her heart. Rage that she didn't necessarily really show at times. She would hide that behind a sort of mask, but in reality, the real truth behind all of it was she was kind of angry at the world. Angry at how the world treated people like her, trying to basically confine her to a box. She would have told her life story to Izuku. Izuku wanted to just take the rings off of these two in the beginning, but hearing their life stories, their whole issues, he would have decided that they were worth keeping. They would be interesting recruits, to say the least, and he could always be sure to knock them down a pedal. He would be he would make sure to knock them down a pedestal if they were to ever get too cocky and try to betray him. He knew that he was stronger than those two. Maybe not truly combined or anything, but he could hold his own against the two at once. That's basically what he knew for sure, especially after all that he had gone through. So that would have made about 4 members in total, not including Izuku. If we included Izuku, it would have been 5 people. Now there would only be the need for just a couple more, really. Izuku would have actually ended up adopting a pet eagle as well during this time. He didn't know why, but having a pet become a Red Lantern just seemed interesting to him, and he had a bit of a deja vu as well. He remembered, not really remembered, more so he had a flashback to a different life where he saw a blue cat in a Red Lantern uniform with the Red Lantern ring around its tail and a very big buff hand just rubbing the head of the cat. He didn't really understand the whole reason for it, but he decided, you know what, it's whatever, because this eagle that he had with him, he didn't know why it was so angry with the world before. It was literally on its very last legs. It was honestly a pretty pitiful sight. He only put the ring on it because he could sense that it had some contempt for the world. It had the same vision in his eyes, that same sort of look, that look in its eyes that you knew it was worthy of becoming a Red Lantern. And this eagle would have formed into something truly magnificent. It would have mutated as well. It would have ended up having the same uniform as all the rest of the Red Lanterns that were within this group. But another change would have, of course, been the fact that it was humongous now. Red eyes, red feathers, and a black beak. A very interesting sight, to be honest. Its talons were much sharper as well. Blood red, you could say. Izuku liked the sight of this new pet of his, and he would ride it around in order to actually make sure to really let people know that he was something to be known, that he was going to fix society. He would have started spreading propaganda as well, talking about how this hero society has lost its ways, that the people are not really in it to save people anymore. The heroes, the people behind those hero masks, they have lost their way. They seem to only really be in it for the money, and that's something that is a fault of the system that was created. That's why he needed to get back to the past, bring it back to the origins, bring back the nobility in all of this. This was Izuku's goal in the long run. Some people would have agreed with Izuku, but many would have been pretty, how should I say this? Pretty hesitant of believing Izuku's words. They were standoffish, you could say, and they would have still sided with the rest of the heroes. Izuku would have just shrugged this off, understanding that, yeah, not everybody's going to be on your side. He had no problems with this. He was aware that this was going to happen, so he wasn't going to really put in any effort to really try and convince those naysayers, because no matter what, there was always going to be that one person to not really believe what is really being said, refuse to open their eyes to the truth. So that's basically what happened with Izuku, and by the end of this time, he would have ended up gathering even more villains to the group, but at the same time, he would have gathered some heroes along the way. Some heroes were kind of interesting, and some of them weren't even really heroes at all, though. One of them was actually from the general course of UA, Shinso Hitoshi. The whole reason why he was part of the Red Lanterns, the reason why he ended up becoming a Red Lantern in the first place, was because of the fact that he had witnessed how bad this quirk society had gotten. He was ostracized for so many years of his life because he had a villainous quirk. What really made a quirk villainous was the person, not the nature of the quirk. No quirk is inherently evil or good. It all depended on the person. When it came on to quirks were essentially like tools, you could say. They were parts of you. You are not necessarily born a villain or a hero. It all depends on the way that you developed over time, how society raised you, and this was what was really trying to be spread as well. No matter what, though, there was always going to be a naysayer. The hero society would have also tried to fight back against these vigilantes that they were calling the Red Lantern Corps. Izuku would have knocked down quite a few other heroes that were trying to go up against him. Of course, he would have ended up going against the likes of Endeavor eventually. But when it came on to this fight, he would have to admit that this one was a bit of a struggle, but he realized that he would only ever grow stronger from these fights. He would only ever grow from these fights and really grow to the point where he would be able to look at the likes of All Might and really show that he is somebody not to be messed with. That although Toshinori Yagi was a good man at heart, he had kind of lost his way. This was something that Izuku was trying to show to the man as well. Show him the error of his ways. That he was also a benefactor of this quirk society. So many people glorify this man, but at the same time, he's still a human at the end of the day. And humans make mistakes. He is not some sort of messiah. He is not some sort of deity. None of that. He is a human man. He is vulnerable. Just because most people cannot hurt him, it does not mean that he is indestructible. Far from it. There was always going to be weakness, and Izuku was going to try and expose that as well. So many prideful heroes dying so early on because of the fact that they thought they were the hardest buzz at the time, thinking that just because they had strong quirks meant everything. And this was what really irked him, considering how he was raised from the very beginning, always being taught that because of the fact that he was quirkless, he was nothing. He never believed in those sort of stories, and he was going to show these people that they were wrong. They were wrong to assume that the quirkless, those that had weak quirks, those who had villainous quirks, all of these things were meant to be ostracized, meant to be outcasts, all of this. He was going to show them that everything in this quirk society needed to be fixed, and this was what was really going on. It was originally starting with the heroes, but as he gathered more recruits, he would realize that no, this goes further than just the heroes, but it goes into how people view quirks in the very first place. This was what was going to need to be cleansed. And the very last thing I'll end this off with is the fight against All For One, Izuku and Tokoyami, alongside Todoroki as well. They would have been watching the fight between All Might and All For One. It was honestly a pretty pitiful fight for All Might. All Might was fighting against a man who was blind, who didn't really even have hearing. This man was blind, deaf, and he barely even had much of a nose either. This man was lacking quite a bit of his senses. This man was disoriented the whole time, and he was still being able to go toe-to-toe with All Might. Izuku was wondering why All Might didn't just try and kill this man already. He noticed the pure rage in All Might's voice though when he heard that this man, Shigaraki Tomura, was actually the grandson of his master. This was a trigger. This was a trigger for All Might. Izuku didn't really know everything about All Might. He admitted that he was a fan at one point, but he didn't know everything about All Might. He didn't even know about the fact that this quirk he had was inheritable. He could pass it on to the later generations. He would have listened in and realized that this was a perfect opportunity. He would have ended up having a ring be sent to All Might. This ring would have attached to All Might's finger, and just like that, a burst of speed erupted from All Might, a burst of new strength. He was revigorated. He had so much more strength, more power, everything, and he was just fueled to the brim. Not only that, but he was also kind of starting to lose it, all at the same time. He was going up against All For One. All For One was confused and would try almost everything in his arsenal just to make sure that All Might would get off of him. Try and push All Might back, but he just kept on getting back up, even faster than before. He was 60 times stronger. It was as if he was back in his prime already, and he was in a new suit as well, red and black. Common scheme for most of these Red Lanterns. Oh jeez. He would have realized what was happening now. He wanted to get his hands on one of those rings for the longest, but it turns out that this was not going to happen because of the fact that this man, All Might, now had one of these rings, and with these rings, he was basically a goner. All Might would have pummeled All For One into the ground multiple times over. It would have been the Hulk against Loki at one point, you could say, just bashing him into the ground over and over again. And then All Might would have stomped on All For One's skull before kicking him all the way into New Jersey. And that is how I will be ending off the video, because right afterwards, All Might would have gone on a crazed spree. Izuku would have made sure to stop All Might though. He would have teleported All Might to his base of operations, where he would have fell into the pool of blood, where he would cool down. He would gain his sense of morality once again, and even then, he was still kind of fueled with his rage. He would have realized everything that was going on, and start to feel a sense of regret. But at the same time, he realized that he would have a new chance at life now. He had a new chance, and if he wanted to keep this chance going, he would have to ally with Izuku. Izuku would have informed All Might of the fact that if he were to ever remove this ring, he would die. This ring replaces your heart. This is a sad consequence of joining the Red Lantern Corps. All Might would have felt defeated but accept the offer. He really had no choice in the matter. Plus, he had the chance to really be able to do much more in society now. He wasn't troubled with some sort of, well, I don't know what to call it. Basically, that time limit he has. This 3 hour and dwindling time limit that he had before. It was long gone now. Even with One for All now passed on into the next generation, and him no longer really having One for All, it did not really matter because of the fact that the Red Lantern ring basically had it to where it brought him to his original sort of body. Not just that, but better than before, really. He was strong. He was strong. He felt stronger. He felt much more energetic. Even in his prime, he never felt this sort of way. It's just that the adrenaline was rushing in through him at all times. It made it hard to sleep. Izuku would have said that that's just another consequence of having the Red Lantern ring. Great rage. Great rage all the time. Use that rage. Use that rage in order to do something for the world. Use this rage in order to help rebuild this quick society, the society that failed us all. And of course, All Might would have went along with Izuku. This ragtag team would have continued to completely decimate heroes and villains alike, and really try and bring the Quake Society back down to square one. And with the likes of All Might now on their team, it was any man's game at this point. It was any man's game, and sure enough, this was more so Izuku's game. Izuku had won the lottery with All Might now on his team, the strongest hero of Japan, probably even the whole world really, was now on his side, and they were able to do quick work of the rest of the heroes and villains. And it only took a couple of years, but sure enough, they were able to start rebuilding until they were able to really reform society into where the Red Lanterns were basically like a military force, police force. They were the ones really running the show, and on top of that, there was no longer any judgment for those that were quirkless, who had villainous, quote-unquote villainous quirks. People who had weak quirks, none of that would be tolerated in this society, especially with the fact that there were more rings along the way. There were always going to be more rings. Izuku would have ended up discovering this along the way. He would have accidentally found out about more of these lantern rings and the fact that there are more sectors in this universe. Izuku would have been interested and tried to actually gather more people along the way. He would have ended up gathering some more sectors, more people along the way in order to fill up these spots for these rings. And he would have learned along the way that there is one for willpower, one for fear, one for hope, one for love, and much more. So eventually, what would have ended up happening in the end is that there would be quite a few lantern cores, all going throughout Earth and many other solar systems. They would have harvested them. They would have made sure to harvest themselves on Earth and different planets and make their presence known. Although there would be some disagreements along the way, but more so, more often than not, more than would listen to Azuko in the end because of the fact that he was the one to start all of this. It sounded far-fetched, but this is what ended up happening in the end. And no, Bakugo still does not get a lantern ring in the end because Azuko still has his grudges against Bakugo, although he would have had it to where Bakugo could still become a hero. Bakugo didn't really need any sort of lantern ring in the first place. And although Bakugo seemed to have cooled down in the later years, he also still didn't seem to be fit for any of the Lantern Corps, and he refused to have him join the Red Lantern Corps of all things. So yes, this is the end of the What If. This is the end of the story. It is King Titan X out. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace.